What would you do for power? What would you sacrifice for your career? Some of us might struggle to answer those questions, but not this 79-year-old woman who was willing to do absolutely anything to maintain control of a restaurant. Anything, including roasting her own niece alive for 3 hours. So what happened? Today's case comes from South Korea, a story that sounds too horrific to be real, but unfortunately it is. This is the Incheon barbecue restaurant torture case. Hey guys! Before we dive into today's story, I've got something really exciting for you. Matchmasters and I are giving away $1,000 worth of prizes to one lucky viewer from this community. An iPad Air, an Apple Watch SE, and AirPods. All yours if you win. Now, let me keep it real for a second. I work a lot, as you already know. Like, there are days when I'm going 20 hours straight, trying to meet deadlines. So when I finally get a short break, even 5 minutes, 10 minutes, I need to actually disconnect, scroll through my feed, zone out, or play something that helps me unwind. And lately, that's been Matchmasters. It's this super fun, competitive Match 3 game. You're playing against real people in real time. And that's what makes it so fun, because when you're playing against actual people, it gets so competitive and it never gets boring. And you have to win, because I don't like losing. The rounds are super fast, perfect for quick breaks, and honestly, I don't feel too guilty because I still get to flex my brain a little. At first, I was terrible, but once you start figuring out those combos and boosters, it's so satisfying. And I think I've gotten pretty good at this now. And remember, you do not want to miss this giveaway. So here's what you gotta do. Download Matchmasters using my special link. It's in the description and pinned comment. Play just one game to unlock the star race, and you've got 7 days to rack up as many stars as you can. Top players make it to the finals, and whoever has the most stars at the end takes it all. $1,000 worth prizes. So if you're grinding through life like me, but you still love a little competition and want a shot at winning some seriously cool stuff, go download Matchmasters. It's free on iOS and Android. Use my link to unlock the giveaway and share it with everyone you know. Let's see who the real Matchmaster is around here. On June 28, 2025, South Korea sat glued to their television screens as the investigative program Unanswered Questions aired an episode that would haunt viewers for weeks. For those unfamiliar, Unanswered Questions have been digging into South Korea's darkest mysteries since 1992, and they are the ones who investigate the cases that fall through the cracks: missing persons, unsolved murders, corporate fraud. But this episode was completely different. This one would leave even seasoned investigators shaken. The case involved a woman who'd been burned to death, not in an accident, not in a fire, but deliberately tortured with burning charcoal by her own family. And the reason was an alleged exorcism performed by her shaman aunt. And remember, this is South Korea. People were shocked because this kind of belief, exorcism rituals that lead to crimes, is not common in South Korea. Because the program aired on national television, all names have been changed to protect identities. But the horror of what happened, that is all too real. So let's start with the victim. We will call her Lee Soo-yeon. You'd walk into that barbecue restaurant in Bupyeong district, Incheon, any day of the week, holidays included, you would have met Lee. She was in her 30s, and she was impossible to miss, not because she was loud or flashy, but because of her warmth. She had this genuine smile that made customers feel like they were visiting an old friend rather than just grabbing dinner. Regular customers adored her. She'd cook their meat right at the table, asking about their kids, their jobs, their lives. New customers became regulars because of her. She'd share her favorite grilling techniques, explain which cuts were best, sometimes even cook for them herself. Lee wasn't just an employee. This was her family's restaurant, and she ran it like her life depended on it, which, in a way, it did. She managed all the finances, worked alongside her brother, and together they kept the place running 7 days a week, 365 days a year. There were no days off, not even for major holidays. Her parents loved her. Her brother depended on her. The customers loved her. By all accounts, Lee Soo-yeon was exactly the kind of person you'd want in your corner. But in January 2024, something strange happened. The restaurant that never closed suddenly shut its doors without any explanation or notice. There were just locked doors where there should have been the smell of grilling meat and the sound of satisfied customers. Regular customers were confused. Some even tried asking Lee's parents what was going on, but the couple had vanished without a word. Even the neighbors had no idea where they'd gone. It was as if they'd just disappeared into thin air. Then a few weeks later, the restaurant reopened. Lee was still there, smiling as always, greeting customers like nothing had happened. Her brother was there too. The familiar aroma of Korean barbecue filled the air once again. Everything seemed normal. Except for one thing. There was a new manager, a 79-year-old woman who'd taken over from Lee's parents. Her name was Shim, and she was Lee's aunt. To the casual observer, Shim probably seemed harmless, maybe even charming. A chatty older woman who liked to socialize, the kind of person who'd tell you your fortune over tea. But the people who really knew Shim understood she was dangerous. She was unpredictable, a master manipulator who'd been perfecting her craft for decades. Shim wasn't just Lee's aunt. She was a mudang, a traditional Korean shaman. Now let me explain what that means. In Korean spirituality, shamans hold a sacred role. They're believed to be conduits between the earthly realm and the spirit world, channeling supernatural energy to help people. They perform rituals, enter trance-like states, dance, chant, and communicate with spirits on behalf of those seeking guidance or healing. Shim had been practicing shamanism for 40 years. She'd built a reputation and had a lot of followers. And most importantly, she had her family completely under her control. But here's the thing. It wasn't because she had any real spiritual power. It was because she was an expert gaslighter. Shim's manipulation started in 1986, almost 40 years before Lee's death. That was the year she claimed to have received enlightenment from a spiritual entity she called grandfather. She started calling herself a shaman, built a temple in Hampyeong, South Jeolla province, and began accepting people who wanted spiritual cleansing. At first, people thought she was crazy, but Shim was patient, and she started small with her own family. Her method was simple, but devastatingly effective. She'd tell people about their past lives, inventing sins they'd supposedly committed in previous incarnations, then blaming every bad thing happening in their current lives on those past mistakes. Did you lose your job? That's because of what you did in your past life. Did you get sick? Past life karma. Relationship problems? Past life sins. And whatever something bad actually did happen, because let's face it, bad things happen to everyone, Shim would pounce. See, I told you so. If you listened to me, if you'd done the cleansing ritual I recommended, this never would have happened. And when something major went wrong, that's when she'd insist they needed a cleansing ritual. Not from just any shaman, of course, only she could perform it. And unlike other shamans who might take their clients to sacred mountains to perform rituals together, Shim had a different approach. Just give me the money, she'd say. Gather the offerings and the cash, and I'll do the ritual alone. Did she actually perform these rituals? Nobody knows, but the money always disappeared into her pockets. The scariest part is that her own children never escaped. Shim told them not to get closer to other people. She limited their interactions with the outside world, even though she herself was known for being outgoing and chatty. Because of her constant psychological manipulation, her 4 children chose not to marry. They lived isolated from society, rarely seen outside except when absolutely necessary, to work, run errands, or when their mother commanded them to. And work they did. Without any real job herself, Shim depended entirely on her children's income. She'd also borrow money from anyone who'd lend to her, funding an increasingly expensive lifestyle. Her children worked day and night, grinding away just to pay off their mother's ever-mounting debts. But draining her own children wasn't enough for Shim. She had her eyes on a bigger prize, her sister's family. When Shim lived in Cholla province with her children, her younger sister lived in Incheon with her husband, son, and daughter, our victim Lee. Even though they lived in different cities, Shim's psychological grip on her sister remained ironclad. Years of manipulation had done their work, and Shim had a specific target in that family, Lee herself. She told her sister that Lee carried bad energy, that she was cursed, that she would soon become the source of the family's misfortune unless they took action. According to Shim, Lee needed to be spiritually cleansed before she reached adulthood, and regularly afterward. And her sister believed her. How could she not? Shim had spent years building this framework of fear and superstition, so she spent enormous amounts of money following Shim's instructions, funding ritual after ritual after ritual. But it was never enough. Even as Lee grew into a responsible, hardworking adult, Shim kept insisting she needed more cleansing. Over the years, the family spent millions of Korean won on these supposed rituals. All the while, Shim was watching and waiting because she'd heard about the restaurant. Shim had tried to make it on her own. She opened a restaurant in Jeju with her children, trying to replicate her sister's success. And it was a disaster. The business never took off. Then COVID-19 hit, and the restaurant collapsed completely, leaving Shim with a crushing debt of 1.6 billion won, which is roughly 1.2 million US dollars. In 2023, desperate to recover financially, Shim ramped up her temple operations. She performed monthly rituals, accepted offerings from believers that ranged from tens of millions to over 100 million won. But even that couldn't solve her problem. The debt kept growing. That's when Shim had an idea. Why struggle to build her own business when she could just take someone else's? Her sister restaurant had a stellar reputation and stable income, and Shim knew exactly how to get her hands on it. Shim's plan was methodical and cruel. At first, she needed to get rid of Lee's parents. So she manipulated her sister into thinking they needed to leave Incheon and move to Ulleungdo, a remote island off the coast. She made it sound urgent, spiritual, necessary, and her sister, after years of psychological conditioning, agreed. But Shim wasn't alone. She then convinced the family, including Lee and her brother, to transfer the restaurant's legal ownership to Lee personally. The reasoning seemed sound on the surface. Lee's name wasn't attached to any debt, so it would protect the business. Lee agreed, not realizing she was signing away her freedom. Because even though Lee's name was on the paperwork, Shim made it clear who was really in charge. When the restaurant reopened after that mysterious closure in January 2024, Shim installed herself as the manager. And for the next 6 months, Lee worked herself to the bone. Lee did everything. She cooked, she served customers with the same warm smile, building relationships just like she always had. She managed the income and handled the finances. But there was one crucial difference. Instead of the money going into the restaurant's account, Lee was instructed to send every penny directly to Shim's personal bank account. Where did the money go? Not to the restaurant, that's for sure. It went to paying Shim's loan interest, which had ballooned because she was constantly late on payments. It covered her overdrawn bank accounts, her credit cards, her children's credit cards, and countless personal expenses. Lee was working 16-hour days, sacrificing her youth, her social life, her dreams. Also, her aunt could maintain a lifestyle she couldn't afford. And still, she wanted more. By September 2024, Lee had finally had enough. She'd started noticing things. the way money disappeared without any improving at the restaurant. The way Shim's so-called financial management consisted entirely of taking money and spending it. Even the cleansing rituals felt off. So Lee made a decision. She stopped sending money to Shim's account and started managing the finances herself, buying necessary supplies for the restaurant without asking for permission. For the first time in her life, Lee was standing up to her aunt, and Shim was furious. Her carefully constructed money-making machine was breaking down, so she confronted Lee and gave her an ultimatum. Hand over the money, stay at the restaurant, and be Shim's obedient employee, or leave the restaurant entirely and move to Ulleungdo, just like her parents did. To Shim's surprise, Lee chose to leave. She packed her bags and prepared to start a new life away from her aunt's control. But Shim wasn't about to let her cash cow walk away that easily. On September 18th, 2024, the last day of the Chuseok holiday, Shim set her plan in motion. She called 3 of her children and 1 of her followers. She told them Lee was possessed by an evil spirit, and that if they didn't perform an exorcism immediately, the evil would devour her alive. These people, who'd spent their entire lives under Shim's psychological control, didn't question her. That afternoon, they constructed a metal structure on the 2nd floor of the restaurant. Based on the TV program's investigation, it resembled a massive grill, the kind you use for meat, but scaled up to hold a human being. Then they went to get Lee. Lee must have known something was wrong the moment they came for her. The CCTV footage showed her struggling, fighting with everything she had, trying desperately to escape. But one woman can't overpower 3 people. They dragged her to the 2nd floor, forced her face down onto the metal structure, and gagged her so she couldn't scream. Then they tied her hands and feet so tightly that every movement left marks on her skin. Then came the charcoal. One of Shim's sons entered carrying a large basin filled with burning coals. Lee's struggles intensified. She knew what was coming. He crouched down and placed the basin directly underneath her body. The irony was almost too cruel to comprehend. Lee had spent years of her life at that grill, carefully cooking meat for customers, perfecting her technique, using fire to create something that brought people together. Now, that same method, charcoal and heat, was being used to torture her to death. According to the investigation, the torture lasted approximately 3 hours, from 3:49 p.m. until around 6:45 p.m., when Lee finally lost consciousness. During this time, the perpetrators took turns adding more charcoal to maintain the heat. Medical experts who testified noted that Lee would have experienced excruciating pain as the metal structure heated up, causing 3rd and 4th degree burns across her body. The carbon monoxide from the burning charcoal would have made breathing increasingly difficult, while the extreme heat caused progressive damage to her internal organs. Investigators noted that at several points, Lee showed signs of seizures and convulsions, clear indicators that her body was shutting down from the trauma. Yet no one stopped. They continued watching, continuing the ritual, even as Lee's body went into shock. Finally, she lost consciousness. Even after Lee collapsed, Shim tried to cover her tracks. She had them take Lee off the structure and tried absurd home remedies, applying wet towels, even placing raw meat on the burns. They wasted an hour before finally calling for help. And when the paramedics arrived, Shim had a story ready. Lee had been carrying charcoal and accidentally fell onto it. A tragic workplace accident, nothing more. She even took Lee to the hospital, probably thinking the injuries might not be fatal or that the police staff would buy her story. But Lee's injuries were catastrophic. The severe burns had caused multiple organ failure, and the next day, September 19th, 2024, Lee died. Lee's death immediately raised red flags. When the police questioned the family, they all stuck to the same story. She was careless. It was an accident. But the 119 emergency responders who'd arrived at the scene that day had their doubts. Something about the story didn't add up, so they requested police support. When investigators arrived at the restaurant, they went straight to the second floor and found the CCTV system. What they saw on that footage would change everything. The video showed it all: the metal structure being built, Lee being forced onto it, the charcoal being placed underneath. 3 hours of torture. Every horrific detail was captured in full clarity. There was no accident. This was deliberate. This was murder. On May 20th, 2025, Shim, her 3 children, and 1 follower were arrested. As investigators dug deeper, the full scope of Shim's manipulation came to light. They discovered she'd been controlling her family for decades, using shamanism as a weapon. They found evidence of her 1.6 billion won debt. They uncovered how she'd systematically isolated her children, exploited her sister's family, and ultimately taken control of the restaurant. Friends of Lee came forward too. One told police that Lee had often mentioned her aunt, how she was a very powerful shaman, and how everyone had to do whatever the aunt said. On August 28, 2025, Shim and her 4 accomplices were formally charged with murder at the Incheon District Court. The prosecution sought life imprisonment for Shim and 15 to 20 years for each of her children and the follower. During the trial, Shim's behavior disturbed everyone in the courtroom. She showed no remorse whatsoever. In fact, she continued to insist that Lee had been possessed by an evil spirit that could only be driven out through a cleansing ritual. In her mind, she had done nothing wrong. But perhaps the most shocking moment came when Lee's parents testified. Instead of demanding justice for their daughter, Lee's parents pleaded for leniency. They asked the court to acquit Shim and the other defendants. They claimed Lee had been possessed, that she'd carried bad energy since childhood, that what happened was a tragic accident during a legitimate spiritual ritual. Even in death, Lee couldn't escape her family's delusion. The public was outraged. Online forums exploded with debates about how deep Shim's manipulation must have run to make parents side with their daughter's murderer. In September 2025, the court delivered its final verdict. Shim was sentenced to life imprisonment, and 4 of her accomplices, including her children, received prison terms ranging from 20 to 25 years. 2 others, convicted of aiding and abetting, were each sentenced to 10 years. The judge noted the extreme brutality of the crime and the decades of calculated psychological manipulation Shim had used to control her family. This wasn't a ritual gone wrong. This was torture, and this was murder. Lee Soo-yeon would never smile at her customers again. She would never share her cooking tips or live the life she deserved. But at least her killer would spend the rest of her days behind bars. So this case forces us to think, how far would people go for money, for power, for control? And maybe even more disturbing, how much manipulation can a person endure before they stop being able to recognize the truth? Lee's parents still believe their daughter was possessed. After decades under Shim's influence, they can't see reality anymore. They've lost their daughter twice, once to murder and once to the lie they still believe. It is heartbreaking to think about what Lee went through. An innocent life taken, a young woman whose only crime was trusting the wrong people. May she rest in peace, and may her story remind us of how easily the human mind can be broken, reshaped, and controlled under the weight of manipulation. Cases like this aren't as rare as we'd like to think. All over the world, people commit atrocities in the name of spirituality, of cleansing, of driving out demons. And families, bound by years of psychological abuse, become complicit in their own destruction. So, what do you think? Was Lee's parents' response the result of decades of manipulation? Or is there something even darker at play? Something that we might never know? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and that is all for today. Thanks for watching.